I'll start by introducing myself, and then we'll go right down to Brenda, Michelle, and Kevin. My name is Dave. I founded Engage Buy Sell about 15 years ago when everybody had flip phones. Now everybody carries a phone into the shower and everywhere they go. We are presenting this because we happen to have some vaccine tracking services. I'll take a second in a few minutes and show those to you. But this is really all about what's going on, both from a legislative way in with COVID and with the OSHA announcement, as well as the human side from Brenda and Michelle. So Brenda, a minute or so background on yourself, and then we'll move over to Michelle.
Absolutely. So my name is Brenda Neckbottle. It's just easier to call me Brenda the HR lady. That's usually my last 20 years of my career sounded like. But I am a best-selling author. I work with businesses of all kinds of sizes to help them solve their people problems. But I'm also a serial entrepreneur as well. So I get a very unique ability to look at this from a business owner's perspective and how this is impacting my team that I have, or my teams, I should say. And in addition to really kind of help, how do we solve the puzzle and put best solutions together for everybody? So
that's great. We are so lucky to have you on the call, Brenda.
Thank you.
Michelle, we don't have a picture of Michelle, but she does really exist. She's a passenger in a car going to an HR SHRM meeting in Tucson. So she's working today. She's not playing hooky. Michelle, tell us a little bit about your work in HR.
Wonderful. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to be part of this amazing panel. I'm Michelle Gray. I am traveling to Tucson right now to one of our chapters, SHRM of Greater Tucson's innovation event. So my background, I have been an HR consultant for several years, but I have been in the HR profession for over 20 plus, ranging everything from small organizations to large, which stem around 17,000 employees. As a consultant, I provide everything that I would say A to Z. I try to make sure that my clients, when I'm working with them, that they actually get that personal interaction where they feel like they have an internal HR versus a consultant. And right now, as you know, we're all facing the what ifs and what do we do? It doesn't matter the size, because we know that the mandate with 100 plus, but a lot of my clients are that under 100 as well. And they're like, hey, we want to do this, or we're dealing with employee concerns and that empathy and what do we do? So I love the fact that that opportunity is there as a consultant to be able to work individually with each client and their staff and how they operate in their culture. In addition to that, as I mentioned, I also sit on the Arizona SHRM State Council Board. I'm the current State Council Director. So I love the time that I get to spend as a volunteer doing the best practices for the HR community. So again, thank you, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Michelle. And Kevin, we were introduced to Kevin by Trish Ennis, who's been one of our panelists from Colorado 2 or 3 times, and we've always referred to all of the publications and work that Kevin and his firm have been producing on COVID and workplace safety. And so we decided we would just reach out to Kevin and see if he could join us today. So yay, Kevin, for joining us. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing. I take it you've not just started on thinking about COVID and in the workplace. This has been something you've been focusing on for months and months and months.
That's right. Thanks, Dave. Glad to be here with everybody. And I'm an employment lawyer on the management side. Before that, I was a human resources executive for about 17 years. At one point, I was the chief HR officer for a group of 22 hospitals in 5 states and several thousand employees. So I've got that background. But what have I been doing lately? Going back to early 2020, I've been part of our firm's national COVID task force. And since last summer, I have chaired our vaccine workforce team. And who'd have thunk it? A vaccine workforce team. I would have never envisioned that being part of my work. But if you look at our website, which some of you may do at some point, and look at our Vaccine Resource Center, oh my goodness, there are so many articles, so many forms, model policies there's just been one issue after another. And we've been really engaged in this full steam for well over a year now. And it's funny because a few months ago, we have weekly calls with our team, at least, just to talk about things that are going on and developments. And somebody in the team, when things had kind of slowed down just a little, said, well, I guess the vaccine team is about to wrap up. And oh my gosh, be careful what you say, because the Delta variant went crazy, all kinds of other things happened. And here we went again. And these different mandates coming from the government, and then the things we saw last week. So it's been a long and winding road, and it continues. And look forward to talking with you about it today.
Thank you, Kevin. I see a few questions coming in the chat. Just as you think about your questions, write them down. I may not get to them in the order that you're typing them, because we do have a little bit of an outline, but we will absolutely get to them. So don't hold your question. Go ahead and fire it in there. I'm going to take 3 or 4 minutes and just tell you quickly about us. We're obviously hosting this webinar. We host 2 or 3 webinars every month on different topics. We've been in business a long time, 15 years, which is a lifetime in the world of mobile. Mostly it's an HR, training, communication-based company, all done on somebody's phone. It's all cloud-based, no apps. And Molly will go to the next one. Some of the clients, huge organizations like New York City Health and Hospital, all the way down to little tiny nonprofits. So we work with the gamut, government, non-government associations, everybody. All right. And because we work so closely with HR organizations and HR managers, they came to us, so many of them came to us about 9 months ago and said, we got to start tracking this stuff. And I hadn't even thought about needing to track this, never imagining that we would be here 2 months before a January 4th deadline with penalties. So we polled our clients, and they said they need these 5 things. They need a mobile site to track things because they don't want to use Google or an Excel. They don't want cookies where the employees are kind of freaking out. Use a computer, use a phone, it doesn't matter. All kinds of analytics, and then use text messaging because so many organizations don't have company emails for everybody. So we put our engineering and marketing team together. Molly and Kim, who are on this call, helped with that. And we came up with a vaccine tracker that's got all kinds of reports. And we'll go to the next one. And we've added a few other little features, a contact tracer where you could let people check a box where they were, so in case there is an outbreak. And then we just built a COVID exposure tracker. So, and a digital health pass is coming. I think we have a slide where you can actually try this. Let's go to the next one. So everybody that wants to have some fun, take out your phone, open it up to the camera. And if you just hold your phone up to the QR code with your camera open, you'll get a little pop-up and you'll land on a page that looks like that little vaccine tracking system. So we won't spend more time on it than that, but if some of the things that you hear from Brendan, Kevin, and Michelle today intrigue you, and you then go back and say, oh my gosh, I got to start tracking this stuff, give me a call or an email and we'll show you what we've got. Most of these things are not very expensive and can be implemented in a day or so. All right, we are here, Kevin, because something just happened, I think, last week, and we all saw these headlines and people got really concerned that this was not a joke anymore. This is actually going to happen. So give us a synopsis of the earthquake that happened last week, and then tell us about the Fifth Circuit Court and what they're doing too. So okay. Share with us where we are, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. And when you talk about the earthquake, in some respects, we were kind of wondering how long this was going to take. You know, we had heard the announcement back in September that there was going to be a mandate, a vaccine mandate, and we kept thinking, well, where is it? Where is it? And employers were asking us about it. Our clients wanted to know what's going on. What do we need to do? Well, we knew what the president announced. We knew what we'd seen in publications, but until you see the rule, you don't know. So finally, we started to hear rumblings. We heard it was sent to the White House for review, and last Thursday, lo and behold, the OSHA Emergency Temporary Standard was issued, and it basically sets up two things. It says that you have to employers with 100 or more employees have to have their employees vaccinated or to require weekly testing. And we can talk some more about how that sort of breaks down, but that's the gist of it. The thing also requires policies and requires tracking. So what Dave talked about was right on target. It's something that's going to be very important to keep up with who's vaccinated, who's not, where do they stand, especially with these deadlines looming for December and January. So that was issued. And along with that, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, also issued a rule requiring companies who are involved, healthcare providers who are participants in the Medicare and Medicaid programs, to require vaccinations. And they didn't include a testing option there, at least not on the front end.
Wow.
Like the OSHA rule did. So I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute as we touch on some of these issues. But those rules were rolled out, hundreds of pages, hundreds of explanatory materials, lots of FAQs from both. We had seen a federal contractor rule before that. So there's a lot of guidance out there now, all saying basically get vaccinated, get vaccinated, get vaccinated. Well, how does that work and what does it mean to employers? You've got to decide which ones of these rules apply to you. And we'll touch on that again in a minute, and then figure out how do I comply. But the overarching goals are to get people vaccinated or tested, at least under OSHA. And what happened then on Saturday, this rule dropped on Thursday. On Saturday, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans had received lawsuits by several companies had filed, and they issued a stay, basically saying we're not going to move forward with enforcing this rule. Well, that doesn't really matter, as we heard from the federal government. I think the president and OSHA both said, well, the deadlines aren't for a while yet anyway. So in the meantime, they're responding to this stay that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals issued. And it technically means that enforcement and the moving forward of the rule has stopped. But what it really means is that circuit and now some other circuits have lawsuits challenging the rule. Those are all going to be put together and sent to one circuit on November the 16th. They're literally going to hold a lottery drawing to decide which circuit court of appeal is going to decide what happens with this OSHA rule. And from there, then we'll know whether it moves forward or not. I think it will, and certainly our advice has been that you should prepare as though this rule is going to go into effect, because if you don't, and the court then decides that no, it's going forward, then you're going to have even less time to get in compliance. So I think at least the CMS rule is going to go forward. The OSHA rule may have a little bit tougher time. In the past, when these emergency rules have been issued, a lot of them have been struck down, but not all. And one of the keys here is this truly an emergency, and has OSHA established that? That's part of what the courts are going to look at. We'll probably hear more decisions and get a clearer picture about this over the next couple of weeks. But in the meantime, we definitely think you should be preparing to implement these vaccine mandates and the policies that go with them.
And that's what your clients are doing. They're setting up the procedures, and they're just assuming that something is going to happen in January, and they don't want to have penalties or face whatever repercussions by not.
And just to make that a little more clear, December the 6th is actually going to be the first deadline by which, under the OSHA rule, employees have to at least have their first dose of the vaccine. And then January 5th is the date by which they have to have the second dose, or the last dose.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
So
Oh, wow.
that's an important thing to know. So even though January is the ultimate deadline, there's an important deadline in December, and that's why employers need to be thinking now about what are they going to do, because you don't have a lot of time, especially for Thanksgiving there. And this case isn't going to even get assigned the appeal. The challenging the rule isn't even going to get assigned until November the 16th. So we're not going to have a lot of time. We think that we'll get some kind of a ruling fairly quickly, but don't expect this to just go away. We think we're going to have to deal with it. It's going to be a reality. So you have to set up a procedure for how you're going to track employee status, how are you going to ensure people either get vaccinated, or if you go the route of allowing them to test weekly, how are you going to manage that testing? And how are you going to manage all that tracking? How is that all going to work? And what are you going to do when you have employees who ask for accommodations on the basis of medical or religious reasons? And I saw we even had a question here. Somebody said, do you have a referral for a vendor to handle the review and adjudication of these accommodation requests? I don't, and frankly, I'm not a big fan of outsourcing that function, because the EEOC wants it to be individualized. There's a lot of things that are very specific to companies and jobs that I think happen better when they're done in-house, and you want your people as best you can, your trained people, to handle those kinds of questions, because that can result in litigation if it's not handled right. So that's not something that I would be real excited about outsourcing.
And Linda Williams, Kevin, if you see in the chat window, asked a question about federal contractors. Does the stay apply to federal contractors?
No, the stay is an executive order. The only thing that was issued was a stay of the OSHA order. So the federal contractor rule is still in effect.
Okay.
Although I think they did adjust the dates. They tried to adjust the dates so that there was coordination between the different departments of the government that are overseeing these different rules, so that the deadlines would line up.
We have another interesting question. If I'm at a company with under 100 employees and now I reach 100 employees, how do you think OSHA is going to handle that? Or would you recommend just get it done now so that it's not gray?
Well, if you hit the 100 threshold, you're covered. Or even if you have 100 now and you drop below 100 later, you're covered. So the best thing to do is probably err on the side of caution and prepare yourself to comply with the requirements of the rule. If you're subject to it, you've got to determine, is the OSHA rule the one that I need to comply with? Is the CMS rule the one I need to comply with because I'm a participant in Medicare, Medicaid? Am I a contractor? Do I need to comply with that rule? Determine which one you need to comply with, but then expect that you need to. I've seen questions too about what if no one of my locations has 100 employees, but overall you have 100.
Yep.
If overall you have 100, or you have a central office where you're operating maybe even multiple companies, but you handle safety issues centrally, and the total number of employees for whom you're handling those issues is 100 or more, then we expect you're going to be covered by this OSHA rule.
Molly, let's keep the conversation going. One more slide, Molly. These were some of the questions we've been receiving this week. I'll start with you, Kevin, on a first couple, and then I'll ask Brenda and Michelle some of the others. State, federal, some people are saying, I'm waiting for my county to tell me what to do. What's your advice about who I'm supposed to listen to? Or is it pretty obvious in your mind who the boss is here?
Well, I would say listen to all of them, pay attention to all of them, but the federal government is the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution says that the federal law is going to take precedence over the state law. And when OSHA issued its rule, when CMS issued its rule, they specifically said that this rule is intended to supersede and override any contrary state or local laws. So that's the one we're going to have to watch. Now, technically today, I'm in Texas. The governor issued the order saying that you may not compel people to be vaccinated if they raise a medical, religious, or personal conscience objection, whatever that means, because it wasn't defined. So today, since the rule has technically been stayed, you certainly need to pay attention to the governor's order, but I think eventually as this plays out, the federal law is going to prevail.
It's going to apply. And the second bullet here, Kevin, are there some exclusions, size or type of company, or whether I'm a nonprofit or I'm a manufacturer, I have 100 people on my payroll.
If you've got
That's
100 or
covered.
more people, then you're going to be covered, unless you happen to be covered under the CMS rule, which then would be the one you'd have to deal with, and that's the Medicare, Medicaid
Yeah, right.
participants.
And part-timers, contract, seasonal, remote workers from home, how are those going to be counted?
All employees are counted.
Okay.
And it's interesting, under the healthcare rule, the CMS rule, that includes students, volunteers. I mean, you think about that, you've got to get all of them vaccinated. So that's a very broad, very sweeping rule.
So if I run a performing arts organization, I have volunteers that are ushers, they're considered somebody that's got to be vaccinated.
Well, that would be covered under OSHA. That's not healthcare. Healthcare is the one that covers the volunteers.
Okay.
So the performing arts would not. That would be under the OSHA rule.
Under the OSHA rules. Yeah. Okay. Michelle, I'm going to put you on the spot. There is a tremendous amount of confusion. I mean, just what Kevin just went through, he mentioned several things that I wasn't aware of. How should management and employees end some of this confusion? Is it emails? Is it company meetings? I mean, this is going to be super confusing over the next 2 months.
Yeah, no, and it is. And it's actually been even prior to the OSHA requirements that have come out, it's kind of been one of those is, what do we do? How do we communicate? Because there is all different ways that companies communicate, right? It could be through email. It could be through meeting, especially in a time today where a lot of people are still working from home. So, management has to look at, and they got to make sure that they're all aligned across the board, regardless of the size of the organization, is that their message is consistent. Because I think that's the biggest breakdown, is when you have management who is supposed to be the leaders in the organization communicating to their employees, and you have one management that may be communicating something totally different than another, and ensuring that if you're able to have in person, if you're in an office, again, still making sure you're following the protocols and the guidelines, but really trying to have that interpersonal connection, because people sometimes can have a better understanding when they're seeing that, that other individual talking. You can feel that understanding and how they're like, okay, we're in this together. Every organization should be in it together because you work together as one. The other piece, if you're having to communicate via email, is ensuring that the communication comes off clearly and there's no interpretation within that with the words or the emotion or the feeling, because interpretation is what could hurt us a lot of times, because somebody could take it wrong. How does the tone sound? But again, it's being consistent across the board, that management is also part of this. There's not an exclusion, and that if you're management, this doesn't apply to you. It applies to all employees.
Is it something that management should, maybe this is the wrong word, use or blame on OSHA or the government and say, hey, it's not me, I'm not necessarily supporting this? Or is that a cop-out and they shouldn't go down that path?
No, they should not go down that path. And here's why I say that, is because we want to take ownership as an organization, because we have to, just like every other law that's required by federal and or state, right? Minimum wage or overtime. We don't blame. When you put blame, you're taking away from how do we now take what the government has told us, and how do we move forward with it to have a great culture of safe business practice, because this falls around, safety for everyone, not just management or, for our customers. It's safety for everybody. So we want to make sure that we're cautious on how we apply those conversations. And instead of putting blame, we're talking about, what do we need to do to be safe for you, for your coworkers, for for our community. And through that, let's work through a process that's going to help us get there together.
Brenda, there's going to be people that are not going to necessarily agree with Michelle's no blame, no emotion, and they're not going to be happy about being forced to get vaccinated or take off time to go get the COVID test. It's going to be, I can't believe you manager haven't figured out a way around this.
Right.
What's your advice for all the HR managers on the phone that are going to absolutely get angry employees coming to them?
Well, they've probably already had angry employees coming to them, and they're probably just going to have angrier employees. But they're going to have a certain section of the population that's going to be this, and it's like, this is nothing new. We've been listening to this now for, almost the better part of a year. Honestly, to handle the confusion of the management is the best thing that you can do is actually start working with your divisional and departmental leaders. And, if you're working in a larger organization, because the majority from what we saw earlier when you were polling people are people with, a number of employees between 1 to 1,000. Well, one HR person or an HR team cannot have 1,000 people come knocking on their door, or more, saying, hey, listen, I don't agree with this. What's up? And and HR professionals are dealing with a lot right now. They're dealing with there's a whole lot of people out there getting holy right now, trying to use the exemption, right? So to not do this, and we know we're a very divided country on this. So, we know this. So, let's not pretend that we're not. But at the same time, you have to educate your leaders in the company. You have to educate your managers in the company on how to effectively respond. Whatever your message is going to be, you have to teach them how to do that, because the number one objective at this point is to gain buy-in. And not everybody's going to buy in, right? Some people will reluctantly buy in. Some people are going to buy in, under duress, as they would see it. Or some people are just going to say, fine, just here, Some people are going to do it out of fear. And, you can't control that range of motions. The only thing that you can control is your message and how your leaders respond to it, whether they agree to it or not. Because you're not going to change minds in this situation. You just really aren't. I have a client right now who's a government contractor. And to be honest with you, if things continue to move forward, they have specialty employees, meaning that they're not like super extra special, but I mean, they have a specific skill set that is necessary to the operation of the business. They've already informed her that they will go find somewhere else to work. That could essentially shut down a business, so it is a scary time. And the last thing you need is a rogue manager or a rogue leader all of a sudden, popping their emotional cork off on everybody. And, next, running around telling Bob, it's like, yeah, I absolutely agree with it. I think this is a load of crap and blah, 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 blah. And, whatever else is going to come out of their mind. They all have to have a unified message. And so you have to work with your leaders. And you also have to be able to give them a little bit of breathing room and space to get off what is on their mind so that they can turn around and effectively.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, that's good advice.
They have to feel what they feel too.
All right, Molly, let's go to our second topic, and then we'll also answer Jelina's comment about, well, you can see that, Kevin, if an employee just doesn't want to get vaccinated, I take it that's okay as long as they agree to get the testing. So it's not it's an either or situation, isn't it?
Under the OSHA rule, it is.
Yeah.
If the employer decides that's the approach they're going to take, the employer has the choice under the OSHA rule. You can require everybody to get vaccinated, and then you've still got to deal with accommodation requests. But I think in the environment that we face, it's probably a good idea in most situations to say to employees, you're either going to need to get vaccinated or to get tested weekly. Give them the choice, and if they don't want to get the vaccine, they can be tested weekly.
What kind of clients, without any names, are you seeing that are basically forcing the issue, or have you not seen that?
I've seen some clients who are forcing the issue, and in some cases, it's because they have had the experience of being in areas that had higher levels of infection, and they maybe had employees who've been directly affected, and they don't want that to happen again. I've seen some that just want to be very cautious. Safety is their top priority, but they absolutely also have to keep in mind that they could lose some employees if they push the issue too hard. So it's a balancing act more than almost anything that I've ever seen in my career, and my total career spans a lot more years than I'd like to admit. So this is a very unusual situation, and it's an emotional one that sparks a lot of strong feelings on both sides of the issue.
Well, it's going to threaten some businesses. Brenda's example, let's say they're machine workers in a factory and there's 5 gals and guys that are irreplaceable. If they walk, that can shut it, it could shut down a plant, a factory, or a company. And maybe they just go to a company that's under 100 employees and they're happy. So
Yeah.
it is really, really hard.
And this could potentially, and I'm not here to sway one way or another. I'm just looking at this from a business acumen standpoint, is that, because I'm over on the government contractor side of life significantly. And, this could actually potentially interrupt the supply chain too. So when you look at the actual government contracting mandates and what has been approved by the OMB in the preliminary guidance, the OSHA emergency temporary standards has already been determined doesn't apply. It is a requirement of federal contractors, period. So when you look at major large corporations such as Amazon and Walmart, they are government contractors. And that's going to be a very difficult thing for them to do. Amazon has their servers at the Pentagon, right? Their service supporters, and they're massive contracts, and they're required now to have all their employees. Well, what happens when they get up and leave, and all of a sudden that contractor can't fulfill the contract to the government? The government now also loses their need, in addition to, it's a ripple effect. It's a very complicated situation, and there is no one right answer.
No, and the ripple effect is just going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
Kevin, what kind of data are we tracking? And then we've got a question too, who is responsible for proof of vaccination? So first, what's the data that employees should be tracking, just as a starter?
Basically, you want to, I would say, follow what you see on the CDC COVID vaccination record card. So get the employee's name, the manufacturer, the lot number is an important piece of information to capture the manufacturer of the vaccine, because that makes a difference now, at least, in how many doses are required, and potentially down the line, maybe whether there's a booster required, and get the dates of administration. That is all information that you want to have and maintain securely, which is why it's important to have really good, reliable systems to protect the information, make it accessible, but safeguarded. So you track that information, and the employer is going to be held responsible for making sure that the information that they're using is reliable. Do you have to be document experts? I compare it to what we've seen in, say, the world of immigration, where employees come in and present driver's license, social security card, green card, whatever the case may be. You don't have to be a document expert, but you can't let, obviously, inauthentic or forged documents by either. Employers are going to have some responsibility. If OSHA comes in, they're going to want to know, what did you do to make sure that this was an authentic record? And if Moderna is not spelled right, if Pfizer's not spelled right, that ought to be a red flag. If the dates don't really match up, there's just things to look for. The document doesn't look like the card that we typically see. So anyway, employers need to satisfy themselves that it's an authentic card.
So you don't think it would be wise just to send out a survey and say, Dave Aschheim, check the box, I'm vaccinated? You think that you need to go a step further and actually get a copy of that card or some proof?
I think you at least need to see the card and capture that information and have some proof. For a while we did see some employers using the honor system, and that wasn't prohibited. But now OSHA is very clearly going to expect that you've seen the cards or seen the proof. So honor system by itself is not going to be enough now.
Any ideas of how long these are going to have to be stored?
Right now, the guidance says through the length, the coverage of the emergency temporary standard.
Okay,
It's supposed to be
alright.
6 months. Now
Okay.
that could change if this temporary standard gets turned into a permanent standard. We'll see. You know, the OSHA default rule was 30 years
Yeah,
for
right.
these records, but
Yeah.
they've said specifically they need to be retained through the length
Through
of
the
temporary
standard,
standard.
right. Yeah. HIPAA, everybody asks about HIPAA. We happen to be HIPAA certified, but I've read that that's not something that's required. What's your view on that?
Yeah, HIPAA is not an issue for an employer. If an employer asks an employee, I need to know if you're vaccinated, that there's no HIPAA issue there. And if an employee
Okay.
says, oh, that violates my HIPAA rights, that's just wrong. It doesn't. If the employee says, well, I'm not going to tell you, you know, you could take a hard line. I would say the better approach would be to say, well, if you can't show us proof of vaccination, we're going to have to regard you as unvaccinated. And
Right.
That's how we'll proceed.
Okay. Brenda, this fifth question, how do I get a dispersed workforce to do this? This is a loaded question. That's probably an hour-long answer, but what's your suggestion on how to get this information?
So, well, your company has an amazing tracker, which I absolutely love, because especially now with, you know, a more hybrid remote type of, you know, work environment, you really need to leverage technology, because technology, I mean, there's the expense of the technology, which is well justified when it's used properly, which is, you know, it won't be very difficult with this type of situation. To be honest with you, is because if you roll this out, you're going to have people using it. But the other piece of it is the side of it that I don't necessarily look at, and that is utilizing the technology is what saves on a company's labor dollars as it pertains to who has to administer it, right? So we are required to do something that traditionally we probably would have taken a more manual approach to it. Then as a corporation, as a business, as leaders, we're actually taking necessary steps. It's not wasteful spending, it's necessary spending, but it doesn't have to be overly necessary, right? So if you're leveraging technology to the best of your ability, then you're actually really cutting back on the labor dollars that's required in order to spend. And if this is something that you're looking at honestly about, you know, presenting to your, you know, corporate offices, to your CEO, or however your organization is set up, that is a competitive advantage in your conversation, because you're going to differentiate yourself. It's something that can be measured, and as a result, it's something that can be justified.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there are a few companies out there that have some tracking systems, and we've got one as well. So that I think using some technology is probably makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Michelle, this notion of I'm going to threaten to quit, do you give people a raise? Do you give them accommodations to take the day off and get tested? I mean, some of these people, like Brendan was talking about, you just cannot afford to lose them. What's your advice to HR managers about those people that are just not happy at all, but are so senior or so important?
Yeah, so, you know, this is one that I think I've been hearing and engage extremely with over several months, because that's the biggest thing is, you know, I see this coming, or what's going to happen, I'm going to quit. And it's been that constant threat. And I think the biggest thing right now is we are so quick to have emotion, you know, as human beings, we quickly react to an emotion, right? And change is something that everyone, it always takes a little bit of time, some faster than others, just depends on, you know, our industry, our background, what we're in. So change, knowing that change takes a bit of time and it's a constant thing. But then I think the biggest part is when talking to these individuals is being able to validate their feelings. Because I think sometimes when we sit and we have a true conversation, regardless if it's on the phone or in person, is validating that person's feelings, because it's their feeling, not ours, regardless if we agree or disagree with it. Once an individual feels that they're validated, that conversation, sometimes you will see it becomes de-escalated. It's not as extreme. And then be able to talk to them about finding out a little bit more without getting into all the other pieces is, where are those concerns? Bringing back information and details about the company culture, right? So it's first kind of bringing it into a calm conversation, because they may be upset and not wanting it because that's what they're hearing, right? Or maybe it comes from a family member and you want to kind of be part of that, oh no, I disagree, but you don't understand why you disagree. So being able to have that. And then the other part is you don't want to lose those. I am facing that right now with an organization that is saying we have critical positions, and they've each said, some are in the management role, that they are going to quit and go exactly like Brendan said earlier, work for a company that may be smaller. And we've had those conversations. So I said, what are the areas that why those employees are working for you, right? What distinguishes your company from another company? So again, being unified across the board with management, having those conversations too. And then next is maybe being a little bit more creative in ways of what can we do to provide some incentives around, hey, we know that this is something that's different, but we're going to do some other engaging events in the company. People stay with companies because they love the culture. Even something as a mandate, if they feel that 90% or even 80% of what they do in the company and they come to work makes them feel good. Sometimes those who don't know it's not a religious reason or a medical situation, they will then kind of come down and go, wait, let me think about that more, right? You're changing the mindset of the individual. So it's really about that engaged conversation and validating their feelings and having empathy as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kevin, this last question is interesting before we move on to this next slide. Can I make that person a 1099? What's your view on kind of changing the nature of that employment contract?
I think it's unlikely to be effective. I wouldn't go that route. It's hard to meet the test to be a 1099 independent contractor. Most of the time, if that's examined, the Department of Labor would conclude that that person probably should be an employee. So I don't think that's a way to resolve the issue.
Yeah, okay. We have a few more things to go through. Thanks for sticking with us, everybody. How do I pull this off? Do I need a lawyer or outside HR consultant? I mean, sitting from my chair, listening to these experts. If I were in all of your shoes, I would find a Brenda, Kevin, or Michelle to help me. Kevin, are you seeing that a lot of companies are contacting their lawyer or finding somebody that specializes in this? Because
Yes.
It's just getting so confusing.
Yes, and I'll tell you, we have a team of lawyers, and it's a challenge for us to keep up with it. And I sure wouldn't want to be out there on my own in HR trying to do this by myself.
Well, and I think just hearing Brenda and Michelle talk about how they would handle difficult employees, like it was just like what Michelle said about give them a forum to express their concerns as opposed to just to shut it down and say, well, this is the way it goes. So I do think having a third party that can either give you some ammunition when you go talk to senior management or validate what you're thinking can really be helpful. Let's go to the third one. Michelle, what's the best way to notify employees of exposures? You've had clients that have had that situation. What's your suggestion on how to get that accomplished?
Yeah, and because each one is different, those that use the internal email communication or an area one, you want to make sure that it's the information that goes out is you're following the contact tracing, right? Ensuring that it's not a mass communication, because then what happens? You put fear. So it's a need to know, and you're not providing information as to the person. Your messaging is, around the area that you may have come in contact to, an individual that has either been exposed or has COVID, something along that line. But you have to be careful that it's not just a mass email. Or if it's in person, that you're bringing the team of who may have had that exposure potentially and having that direct communication to them. And I have those all the time where a company wants to just send out a blanket email. And I'm like, no, you don't do that, because you're just going to scare the entire staff. And you also remind them to, be cautious and not disrupt the workplace. So you're not violating anybody's rights, but you're not disrupting the workplace by going and having these guesses. You start talking about it or if you're aware of who it is, that those conversations are kept in a setting non-work related, that you're not disrupting. I always said, do not disrupt the workforce, because then it affects the next thing and then the next thing.
Yeah, I agree. Brenda, Michelle was talking about messaging. How do you use messaging to keep during this crazy next 3 months, the culture not kind of denigrating down into something that's not a good culture?
Yeah, well, again, we've been dealing with this now for almost 2 years. So, a lot of the fear factor when it comes to somebody, getting exposed to COVID at work is now kind of like, no, okay, here we go again, right?
Yeah.
So that's the good news. So we're not lighting people off, or we're not in a position where we're really lighting people off like Roman candles, right? Not like what we were in the beginning piece of it. But at the same time, every company has to take a look at what their communication, what their strengths are in their communication strategies, and then also what their weaknesses are. So if there's a particular area of the organization, and I deal a lot in the small business area, so I really play in an area, under 200 and, rising entrepreneurs with rapidly growing teams. And, so it's always a challenge. And when you have a particular area of your team where maybe their manager isn't the best communicator, you got to figure out how you're going to shore that up, right? So that way your message is unifiedly. If it's not a word, we're going to make that one up.
I like it. Good.
You're like, yeah, welcome to my world. Anyway, so it's hitting all avenues. And so where you have a pothole in that road, and you're going to have to find a way to fill it. Messaging, text messaging is really simple, but you also have to take into account that you're also dealing with cross-generational communication as well. Some people may want to have, an opportunity to ask questions immediately. Other people are just like, look at their phone, they're like, okay, whatever I have to do, just let me know. Everybody's going to be different. So you're never really going to hit 100% satisfaction. You're just going to have to do it early, often, and consistently.
The clients that we've been working with, Brenda, over the last, 3 months that have implemented this have been super nervous when they implemented it. But their messaging was basically, this is a new government regulation, it's coming, and we all have to comply. And they received, 1 or 2 people out of a 400-person organization might be causing a stink, but it's not the 5 or 10% that they kind of were fearful of. So it's good to over prepare, but hopefully if your messaging is right, it's not going to be the big PR disaster that it could be, I guess.
That's been my experience too, Dave.
Yeah, and I think you also have to realize that messaging your employees is not posting something on TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different environment. And I think we're so used to seeing people being reactionary on social media. And we kind of, because, that's what we look at for an extended period of time, but we don't always have that same like close touch point with individuals in a larger work environment. So we kind of, are anticipating things to be a little bit more worse than probably what they're going to be. But if your messaging is good, you're not going to get a volatile response.
Yeah, and can I add to something that I think I love, as we're all kind of, everything is different, and there's something I always say, it's not necessarily the one size fits all, because all cultures are different within companies. But I think it also goes back to, leaders are the examples. So if your leader has a positive, regardless of what's going on, working with their employees through these challenges, through these times. And I guess I would say in a nutshell is really being interactive, interacting, having those face-to-face, touching base versus being reactive.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is just so important. Otherwise, the reactions will just take over, and that's not good. One more slide, Molly, and then we'll wrap it up. Kevin, do we think a lot's going to change in the next 4 to 6 months, or what we've seen from OSHA, that probably is about what we're going to be seeing?
I think what we've seen is what we can expect over the next 4 to 6 months, I hope. But who knows, that we'll see a leveling off maybe of the COVID issues, but that just remains to be seen.
Yep. Cynthia asked a question, Kevin, does this mandate apply to workforce development agencies that receive federal funding?
It applies to the OSHA rule applies to some state agencies. It depends on what agencies you're in. So there's there's some other particulars we'd have to get into there.
Got it. Okay. The rule will be enforced through OSHA's inspectors like they enforce now. It's going to be spot checks and then probably a lot of publicity about those people that are not complying and big fines, and that's probably just a big PR thing. Probably.
OSHA may be looking to make an example out of some companies that haven't taken this seriously enough. So I think everybody should be very serious about preparing. Start now. Start getting ready.
Start now.
They're going to have people out there, and they're going to be responding to employee complaints too. Don't forget the importance of that. It's another reason why it's important to keep employees engaged and that you're communicating with them as opposed to them feeling like they have to go someplace else to vent.
Yeah. In terms of the third bullet, how long do we have to put this in place? At the moment, except for what the Fifth Circuit Court said, January 4th is the date. So you're not expecting there to be a 30 or 60 day kind of forgiveness policy or things?
No, I expect, first vaccination by December the 6th and second vaccination by January the 5th.
Okay. Penalties are severe? Could be? Could be.
$13,000 and something is per violation. And if they find a willful violation, those can go up over $100,000 each. So they can add up in a hurry.
Can add up. Yeah, exactly right. All right, let's move to the next slide. We're almost out of time.
Excuse me.
We will email you this presentation tomorrow, and you have LinkedIn here and the company names and phone numbers. So you'll all have that. I suggest contacting our folks if you think you need a partner as you go down this path. Brenda, final thoughts, and I'll go to Michelle and then Kevin before we sign off.
Stay very fluid between now and there's a lot of legal action that's being taken right now. And I mean, think of yourself like a very flexible Boy Scout, right? Or a Girl Scout. You're prepared for anything and you won't be surprised when change happens, because the entire pandemic, in the beginning it was changing almost every hour, it seemed. So I anticipate more change coming down. We're going to see what's going to happen, but yeah, we don't know what we don't know yet still.
Be like a Boy or Girl Scout. I like that. How about you, Michelle? Final thoughts?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Be prepared. Don't sit back and wait, because I think that's the worst thing we can do is say, oh, something's going to change. I've been seeing that happening is where some HR professionals are out there and going, oh, I'm going to wait to see if it get overturned. I would not do that. So it's better to be prepared and proactive than, again, being reactive to something and not be prepared and guide your team and your management team and company in the right direction.
I like that. And Kevin, how about you? Final thoughts.
Start getting ready. You don't want to just totally throw everybody into a tizzy, but start getting ready. And then remind everybody the underlying motivation here is workplace safety. And I think that helps enforce the important message.
And there's no reason that companies couldn't start collecting this information now, because if I get a copy of your vaccine card, then I don't have to worry about collecting it later on. So might as well start now before the holidays and get as much of this done. I know in our company, when new clients come on board, within about a week, they've got about 90% of all of the folks in the company having filled out the forms. So now they're just left with the 10% that are hard to get to, or they're on sick leave or something. So that is my advice: is start early, just like what Kevin is saying, and go hire Kevin or Brenda or Michelle. Thank you, everybody. We took a long time, but your questions, we got to most of the questions. We'll send you this presentation in the morning, and I sure appreciate our panelists who have been terrific, and for all of you for all of your great insight and questions. So thanks so much, and this will wrap up our webinar for today.